Welcome to Art Salon. I love the talk and the energy in the room. I'm Ellie Shore. Most of you know me. There's a few people here who are here for the first time, and welcome. I have been running art salons at the Armory Art Center for 5.5 years, going on 6 years now. And I find fascinating artists from Miami, from Broward, from Palm Beach County, doing all kinds of different things. I really look for a mix of people who are working in different kinds of materials, working on different kinds of subject matter that they're expressing through their art. I find that I'm personally drawn to work that has to do with culture and that in some way engages with the contemporary world and the world that we live in, the issues that we're surrounded by. And tonight I'm introducing Anja Marais, who I met in the North Miami MoCA 2014 South Florida Cultural Consortium exhibition. Her work was so amazing. It was a really large installation. I think it probably could have filled up this room. It was high and wide and had volume and structure and wood supports and many, many layers of what kind of looked like photography, but it kind of looked like painting, and I wasn't clear on what it was about. It took a while to figure that out, but it was really a fabulous installation. And I met Anja, and I saw her work again a few months later in another exhibition, and I was just sold and invited her to speak. So Anja Marais is born in South Africa, educated in South Africa. She's got a bachelor's in fine arts degree from the University of South Africa, and came to, I think, the United States. Maybe she's lived in other places, I'm not yet sure. She's had artist residencies all over the world, in Korea, in Japan, in St. Petersburg, Russia, and in a number of different places in the United States. She uses photography and all kinds of found objects and all kinds of alternative processes, which she will share with us. And her work is always about immigration, migration, worldwide and throughout the ages. And I think that's something that has resonance for all of us in our own family lives at some time or other, if not ourselves, our parents or our grandparents or our great-grandparents. But beyond that, it's unbelievably relevant right now. And so, Anja Marais.
Oh, thank you so much, Ellie and Jerry, for inviting me to be here. I'm very grateful, and I love having dialogue around my work. And I know we're going to have a discussion afterwards, but I just want to let you know that on my last slide, I have some contact information, because if you're like me, sometimes I go home after art talk and I think about it and a question do pop up. And I just want to let you know you're welcome to email me whenever if you feel like you want to ask me something more about it. I also just want to have a little disclaimer. It's probably not important, but I just want to say I might have a slide or two of disturbing images. If you're sensitive, it might upset you. But when I explain you the context of it all, I think you will understand why. You know, when I talk about my work or I look at other artists' work, I always try to think that art should not be about me or about the artist. Art should be because of the artist. So I first just want to give you a little background of me and the reason what caused me to be an artist and the reason why I work with themes that I'm working. And like Ellie told you, I was born and raised in South Africa, but it was during apartheid. So that was obviously a very interesting era to be in. And I was fortunate in the sense that I had what I call two mothers. My mother was a teacher, so she hired a black nanny to take care of me. So for about the first 5 years of my life, I always say that I had a white mother and a black mother. And both my mothers are wonderful women. They are very nurturing, but they were both very polar opposites because they have such different backgrounds. So my white mother is a very devoted Christian woman. She's from the Lutheran Church, which is called the Netherlands Reformed Church, which is very strict in South Africa. And then my black mother, she is from the tradition of ancestral worshipping that goes far, far back, and also of animism. So when I was raised, my black mother also, she always had me tied to her back, so I was always listening to her stories and what she had to say. And she said that we are born perfect. We are born in absolute harmony, the same way that a flower is born or a tree is growing. It's just perfect. But throughout our lives, we will have tricksters, or in Africa they call them also demons, that will trick us to take us off our harmonious way. And then my white mother said that, no, we were born in sin. And, and it's up to us throughout our lives to redeem ourselves and to find a way of purification and to reborn. So in my little mind, from very early on, I understood duality intuitively, because I was immediately giving two opposites right away. And I figured that, okay, one of them has to be right. Either my black mother's right or my white mother's right. And I had to pick a side. But what happens when you grow up is that you have your own experiences. And sometimes direct experience goes even further, and you have fundamental experiences. And I'm going to quickly mention two of them because they created a major shift in me. And this shift give me a new interpretation about duality. So the first is, both is two stories. So the first story is, that is me, my sister, in the wheelbarrow. But the story is about the man in the background. So we also had a black gardener that took care of our garden. And I was living in this bubble. I was having these wonderful mothers. I have a wonderful father. We live in this beautiful area, and I was in this world of imagination. So when he came to be in the garden, I saw him as one of my friends. So I really wanted to be involved in his life. I wanted to be part of him. So I followed him everywhere. And he was cleaning one of the beddings one day, and he had a little pile of rocks. And I guess he couldn't take it anymore, because he always looked away from me. But this day, he turned to me, and he looked straight at me, and he had such an intense look on his face, but at that time, I didn't know what that meant. But now, of course, I understand that that was pure hatred. So what he did is he took the rocks and started throwing rocks at me. And something happened to me that day. I went into fragments. I shattered. And I realized that a new zone have opened for me between polarity, that there is also a place of untruth. And I called that a place of disintegration. And I started to question the stories my white mother told, my black mother told. So, you came to learn that there's always decay and disintegration, and I sort of learned that at an early age. Then I decided to continue to go to art school, and during this time was like the 11th hour of apartheid. And the campus I was on was like a pressure cooker. Every day there was riots, every day there was demonstrations, and it was just very intense. And a friend of mine, she came also from a farm area, and she said, okay, this is too much. We need to get away from all of this. But you'll be like 19 or 20 years old. So we decided, okay, we have no money. What are we going to do? How are we going to get away from all of this? So, when you're young, you're stupid. And we decided we're going to hitchhike through the country. Now, you have to understand, this is a time where we are at the brink of what they at that time thought was going to be a civil war. And there was also conflict amongst all the black tribes, because they understand that there's going to be a new power. So the ANC, which was the Tswanas, and the Inkatha of the Zulus didn't get along as well, so there's conflict between them as well. So me and my friend packed our bags and we decided to hitchhike. So at this time I was in a city called Pretoria, which is right next to Johannesburg. And if you don't know this, that Johannesburg is an enormous city. It's per square meter larger than New York City, although the population is way less. It's just very wide spread out. And the reason for that is that Johannesburg in those days itself was white, and then all the townships next to it was black. So they count that in as well, and that's how spread out it was. Anyway, we miscalculated our time. We didn't know what we were doing. And as we were going down the highway, it started to get dark. And we just managed to pass Johannesburg. So when you can see the city lights of Johannesburg, and then in the darkness around us, we start seeing fires that lit up. And we realized deep down that we're in trouble. And we realized we have to flag down cars really fast. So there was all these shiny Mercedeses and BMWs that just will whip by with a lot of white men in it. And we tried to flag them down, and they will look the other way. And something started to happen to me again. Realized why would my own people know that these two young girls are on the highway? Why would I pass them? But then this white little truck passed us, and they stopped and pulled back, and this black man was inside of it, and he poked his head out, and my heart started beating. I'm like, okay, maybe this is where we're going to be in trouble. And he said, what are you doing on this road this time of night? Are you crazy? And we're like, oh, no, we're fine, don't worry about us. And he kept on saying, no, you cannot be here. And then he started getting out of the truck, walking towards us, and he says, you have to come with me. You have to come with me. I will take you to safety. And first we didn't want to do it. And he says, do you see all these fires that's coming up on the side? He says, that is Soweto. And he says, see all the fires in the distance over there? He says, that's Vosloorus. And he says, tonight things are really going to go down. If I leave you here, you're going to be dead. So I decided to trust him and went along. It's the first time I tell a story in public, but anyway. So we went with him, and instead of him dropping us past the townships, he started to pull into the darkness of the township itself. And of course, you think the worst is going to happen, but he pulled into this modest little house, and the front door opens up, and his wife and kids came out, and he says, I have brought guests home tonight. And we managed to enter his house, which was very bare and minimum, and I remember there was a poster on the wall that says, black is beautiful. They only had 2 mattresses, and he said, okay, we will sleep on the one, and you and your friend will have the other one. And I was laying that night, and I was thinking to myself, the knowledge that was handed to me was wrong. Something is different, and it's not the polarity that I thought it was. So I just want to show you a photo of this amazing family. I happen to have one. Anyway, this is the man that saved our lives. And he got up very early that morning, and he drove us further away beyond the townships so we can hitchhike further safer. So valid lesson was learned that day. And this space that opened up for me, this new tension that opened up, was that of transformation. I realized that on the opposite of this tension of disintegration, we can also find a way to rebuild ourselves. And you can only do that from direct experiences that we had. And I wondered then that instead of picking the story of my white mother over my black mother and vice versa, that maybe both of them are true. Both of them can be true at the same time, because we were born beautiful and perfect, but we do contain the sins of our fathers within us. And we do try to, throughout life, redeem ourselves and at the same time protect the purity that we do have in ourselves. Then the best way it dawned on me is when I read Greek mythology, and I read about Persephone, and she was the daughter of Demeter, and the mother was the goddess of growth and agriculture. But Hades was the god of the underworld, and he fell in love with her, so he abducted her, and he took her into the underworld, where he kept her as a slave and as his own. So what happened to her is, even though she missed her mother, she realized that Hades was a man that was very lonely, and she grew compassion for him. But she was still very miserable being there. And he came to love her as well. And for her to stay in the underworld, she has to eat the fruit or the water of the underworld, and she will be permanently there. So she decided that instead of doing that, to eat a little bit. So Hades offers her a pomegranate, and she only ate like 6 seeds of it. And what that meant is that when she ate those 6 seeds, she could immediately see the underworld simultaneously with the above world. And she became 2 goddesses. She could ascend for 6 months, and she will become the goddess of spring. And then she descends for 6 months, and she became the goddess of the underworld. But she could contain both these worlds at the same time. And I was interested in this fact that instead of having duality and non-duality, is actually containing both at the same time. And if you read the work of Jung, he would tell you to be an individual, you have to be able to embrace your darkness. We all have a darkness in us, and by holding on to it and embracing it, we become whole. So this is sort of how my little yin-yang look like. This is the polarities of black and white, and then in between them is where we really exist, which is that direct experience, that experience of disintegration and that experience of transformation. But you have to experience it yourself. There's nobody that you can tell you that. There's nobody, you cannot read a book about it. You have to experience it yourself. And it's sort of like being in a liminal world that's not attached to any of the dualities. And I feel like when you're in this world of tension, that your senses, like for instance, when I was on that highway, or when those rocks was thrown at me, that your senses lit up. You see better, you hear better, you feel better. And out of those heightened senses is when the creativity flows. That's where the direct experience equals creativity. So it is, in a way, to always hold both at the same time. Descartes said that we should hold opposing ideas simultaneously at the same time to really experience the truth. Okay, so what's very important for me to be in the zone of experience, direct experience, is the ancestral and also nomads. That we are born with our predecessors within us. That all our ancestors necessarily didn't fulfill their cycles, and this is a deep African philosophy, that we have them all within us. If you consciously or subconsciously know this, but you might act that way. So I understood that because my ancestors carry from both polarities, that I can carry the oppressor in me and also the oppressed at the same time. And that most of them were nomads. Then one of the most natural states of being as a human being is to be a nomad. We naturally cross the plains and the landscapes the same as wildebeest and buffalo to go with the seasons, so we have better food, better shelter, better protection. And it's a natural way of being. And for me, that becomes very important in how I see my ancestors. The second principle to be in this place of experience for me is place and also habitat. One of my most important writers that I love is Ben Okri. He was from Nigeria, he is from Nigeria, and he talks a lot about a displacement in Africa, where he speaks of like places not where you come from or where you go to, places what you carry within you. And he talks a lot about how you carry earth within you. And not only do we carry place within us, but we also are surrounded by our habitat. As nomads, our habitat was wherever we found where we were needed. And as nomads, we also have lost our habitat because it became about borders and walls and how to break up the geography. The other principle for me to exist in this place of experience is also distance and landscapes. Now, distance equals time and movement. And for a nomad, or if you're displaced or immigrant or refugee, you do have to cross a landscape at some point and make a distance. For example, when they went to Africa and they took the slaves and they put them in the belly of a ship, the ship still had to cross the ocean, and therefore the distance and the landscape. So I found landscape very interesting because if you also watch a lot of historical documentaries about the Second World War or the First World War or what's happening in Aleppo, you will always see sort of the same footage of people crossing landscape, and they will carry with them their bags and their bundles and all their wagons. So that is sort of like kind of rough idea how I got to where I am today. And I just want to quickly talk about some influences. I was raised in the bushveld, so I'm very inspired by this kind of landscape, which is more dry and arid. And it's a landscape of contrast. Like, we go through cycles of drought. Sometimes for 4 years, there's just no water, and it becomes very dry, and you see the mud cracked, and sometimes you can see carcasses of animals out there, but then suddenly the rain will come, and it will just transform in this absolute lush green wonderland. This another African landscape. I spent time in Namibia, which is a very powerful landscape in a beautiful country. And I always feel like some of that sand got in my soul, and I still carry it around with me. I got really interested in the Russian writers, and the reason being was I found like writers like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy, when they talk about their characters had this ability to maintain that duality. Like, it was difficult for you to pick between the murderer and the victim, because he made you have empathy with the murderer and the victim at the same time, and it creates this conflict in you because how can both things be true? So I really love that. And I spent some time in Russia for that reason, to experience the place where these writers were. And at that time, I also got interested in Russian cinema, like Andrei Tarkovsky. And his work is a lot about decay and renewal as well. I was able to spend some time in Japan as well, where I was taught to do master old-fashioned paper making. So there I got in contact with the Japanese philosophy and Shinto religion. And Shinto is a religion that really treats the earth and nature as sacred. They believe that night and day and darkness and light dovetails at all time. And I was really drawn to that. And the same with Japanese cinema. Artists that I'm really influenced by, I'm influenced by artists that work with social issues. And specifically, I love Romero Bearden's work because he dealt with serious topics, but he was never pedantic. And I really enjoy the technique he used with paper as well. I majored in sculpture, so my background is really sculpture. And I really love the work of Auguste Rodin, and especially because he always talk about that you always have to see the fingerprint of the artist in the work. This is the sculpture work of Cy Twombly, and why I like his work is that it also has this feeling of it's decaying at all time. But it reminds me in Africa when they have purification rituals, their masks are always covered in these layers of white because white is the color of purification. It reminded me of that. So after I finished art school, I had a choice. I could continue in academics and delve deeper into existing knowledge, and I feel like it was a sort of form of conditioning. So I decided I want to go after these experiences I had, which I call that fundamental experiences that caused me this shifts and that feeling of tension. And I decided as an artist, I need this experience to create. So the only way I could figure to do that was once again to travel and to cross different borders myself. And the only way I could do art at that time was with photography. So when I photograph where I was interested in landscapes that have that feeling that it contain history and time and a story somehow. But when I got these photographs and I started to print them out, I was always very disappointed because they were so perfect and exact. And I started to miss how I experienced texture in my sculpture. And I started to come up with different ideas in how to bring texture back into my photography. So I started working with installations, and I started to try different chemical processes of transferring my photos onto fabric. For instance, this photograph was transferred onto an old tablecloth, and this is a used tablecloth. So when I got it, it already has stains on it from a family that it used to belong to. And all the items I use, all my found objects, I use for that reason, that is something that has been used by somebody else. So by the time I'm using it, it already contains that innate story, the same way the landscape already have a story. And in this piece, it's called The Crossing, and it talks about that eternal cycle of displacement. This image reminded me when I saw historical documentary about refugees or immigrants, and it always had that kind of the same look to it. And I want to speak about how it's just a continuous cycle that keeps on happening. And I use shoes in this installation because based on what Ben Okri talked about, that we carry the earth within us. And I also use a lot of dress shoes because a lot of people, when they are displaced, they don't necessarily think they're going anywhere. You know, if you once again look at this old footage, some of them were actually pretty dressed up because they thought they're going to be home back tomorrow, and sometimes had their best clothes on. I also use children's shoes because, you know, all ages are affected in displacement. In this work, I did a transfer of a photograph of a landscape with it's like a little brook that runs through it, and it disappears into the forest. And once I did the transfer, I stretched it over this stack of chairs. And once again, the objects I use as well, the found objects, I imagine that it could have been in a suitcase or on a little wagon when people are moving through this displacement and landscape. So these chairs sort of represent, each level represents a generation that is built on top of each other, and how the specific landscape could have had multiple generations of displacement that could have happened through it. And at the bottom of the stack, the chairs are on a sort of a rocking chair that symbolizes that it's a perpetual movement. This work is the same thing. I did transfer photography of landscapes, and I did these little huts that is similar to the huts that refugees use before they have found a camp. So usually they just gather fabrics or plastic or sticks, and they build these little huts. Sort of a detail of that. And this piece is one photograph that I took of also of a landscape. And then what I did is I fragmented it, I broke it up into pieces. So when you're close to the work, you only see pieces of the imagery, and it's almost abstract. But then when you move away from it and you look at it full on, you understand that it's one image. So I wanted to play again with that idea of unification and fragmentation and decay. And you can see in the back of the piece is the wooden structure. This wooden structure sort of is holding up this landscape and speaks of sort of, once again, about different dualities of even though it looks chaotic, this is the strength of this system, this landscape depends on the structure itself. This piece here is a transfer as well, and it's photography of children, and it is transferred onto baby mattresses. When I was working on this piece, I saw footage of children in Aleppo that were playing as if nothing was going on. And the adults will stand next to them, the adults will be drawn and worried, and the children will still be playing as any other child in the world. And it reminded me a little bit also when I was a child, children are apolitical, they have no idea about politics and can sort of exist in a bubble within it. So another influence that's very important to me is political posters. I noticed that you constantly see posters during especially times like these, and I started to enjoy the interaction of nature with it. You know, they start to peel, they start to wash away, you can see the sun bleaching it out, and I enjoyed the way that how nature become a collaboration with this image. And I noticed this texture that's starting to show up when the paper are peeled off and, you know, the color is taken away. So I was thinking, like, how can I bring that kind of texture to my photography? In Russia, I did this project where I decided to go into cathedrals and to photograph the worshippers within these cathedrals, because this is sort of a landscape itself, an internal landscape of transcendence and transformation. And if you go down the road from this cathedral, I found a TB hospital. This is in St. Petersburg, Russia, a little bit outside St. Petersburg, Russia. I found this hospital that was built in 1836 and was completely in decay and falling apart. And I started to play with the idea, like, how would it be if I take these photographs of people in this mode of, in this tension of transformation, and I will install it in this old broken down hospital. I also thought that would be interesting because a lot of the people that worshipped in this cathedral, which was Russian Orthodox, will sometimes take shortcuts through this property. And I could imagine that these people, that they might walk through it and they will see themselves or somebody that they know. So that was one way for me of trying to approach photography different and bringing more texture to it, something more interesting. And I thought, but maybe I can push it a little bit further. Since up to now, I'm still working with history, but I'm working with history of the ecological and the ancestral. What if I actually return back to actual written history? So, as you can imagine, that the history in South Africa was really complex because it was written by the victor. And when Mandela came into power, with democracy, they started this Truth and Conciliation Committee where they try to get everybody's story out so that they can, almost in a way, rewrite history. Unfortunately, it was wonderful to have these stories coming out, but there was specific situations that people that were part of situations back then was not alive anymore, or they disappeared, or they didn't even have their names. So I got interested in certain massacres where if you go in to research the massacre itself, you couldn't even find people's names. They just didn't exist. So in my research, I started to collect old press photography from the Sharpeville massacre, and then trying to think a little bit about history itself. And I imagine that the only true witness to what happened during that time is the landscape itself. So for me, Mother Earth was the only one that could stand there and watch it happen, and she watched everything we do. And I wanted to find a way of bringing the victim back to this place of truth. So I started working with collage, where I print out different textures of photography, and then I will glue a layer on, and then it will wash away the parts I don't want. And it will glue another layer on and wash away the parts I want. So I build it up, and I finally could get that result of weathering, almost like it has been outside in nature itself and collaborated with the sun and water. And in this work, I make the victim melt away into the earth, not because I want to erase the victim, but it's my way of saying that the victim is remembered by Mother Earth and she knows the truth. So this is also footage from the Sharpeville massacre. And for this massacre, around 67 or 68 people were shot by the police. And they were all shot in the back. And once again, if you try to find their names, it just doesn't exist anywhere. And I did the same treatment with that as well. You will see that the victims themselves are disappearing back into the savanna, the grass. And a close-up of the texture itself. So I continue working with landscape and the dualities and that tension of experience that is within it. For instance, I would do work like this, which goes back to the story of Persephone, the way she was the goddess of spring, but at the same time she was the goddess of the underworld, and this duality within the landscape. Another piece of found objects, I collected all these old frames that could have hung in numerous people's homes, different homes. So when I started using them, they already came with a story in the background. And I took one image, this is an image of the Baltic Ocean, and I once again broke them up into fragments, so when you're close by, it's just a little abstract, almost paint little work, which is also transfer photography. But when you step back and you look at it, it is one image. And I also started to play with the idea of the in and the out, that are you inside, let's say, a ship looking for a portal, looking outside, or are you on the outside of something that is leaking? This is part of a diptych, and same things. So now again, I found a way of bringing more texture in the work, but I wanted to push the photography even further. I was wondering, like, if I work with the concept of distance and movement through landscape and displacement, how can I get my photography to experience that same kind of journey? How can I use another way in expressing the photography itself? So I started working in pixelation animation, which is, instead of using puppets or dolls, you use actual people and the environment itself, and you it's pretty much a time lapse. You do a lot of photography that you combine together to create a little stop animation. So for instance, this film is almost 7 minutes long, and I had to take almost 10,000 photographs for the full piece. So I will just show you like a minute or two of this. This is the cathedral behind where I did most of my photography. So these are a girl from St. Petersburg that I used for this, and she's a ballerina, and she was just perfect for this because you have to move in extreme slow motion for me to take time to take each photograph. This is based on the poetry of Anna Akhmatova, where she talks about the Russian Revolution, where she lost a lot of people she loved, and she said that each person that she had to say goodbye to became like a white stone within her. And because she was carrying all these white stones within her, she could metamorphosize. So she has been going around picking up these stones, and she will bury it. So I did this photography, which is 10,000 photographs that's lined up to form this movement. And then I thought, okay, how can I now take the photography to the next part of the journey? So I took still images out of the film itself, and I created transfers from that on, once again, found fabrics. This is another pixelation that I did in Georgia, and it's called The Red Cardinal, and it's about me and two other photographers went into the forest in Georgia, and we just did photography, and we had a model with us, and a little red bird, a male cardinal, keep coming flying around us, and they said to us that the Native Americans said that if a red cardinal flies around women or a woman, that she's going to go through a transformation. There's a transformation in her future. I'm just going to show you a tiny clip of it. you want to see this piece, you can go to on my website, and it's all there for you to watch in full length. So the same thing, I pulled out the photography from the pixelation animation as well, and create further work. This is on found cloth that already contained stains and tears from its previous life. This was another pixelation that I shot in Finland, and it is also of transformation within a landscape. And then I took out photography from it and transferred it onto used fabrics. And this specific was a quilt that somebody was working on and then abandoned. And I found it on an old attic, so it had a lot of rat nibbles on it and old stains from when the ceiling, the roof was leaking. And it's once again talk about containing both truths at the same time. So I guess I only have one project to talk about, and this is the latest project I have done. I became very interested in how the darker thing was handled and about the Haitian community. And I found an opportunity to work with young immigrants who was the children of their parents or great-grandparents that came over to this country. So I've organized clothes and props, and I took photographs of these children, these kids, resembling the way their parents or great-grandparents looked when they came over to the country, sort of like a vintage look. And then I printed out these photographs and I installed it in a building, but into the corners of the building itself. And this piece is called Out of Sight, Out of Mind, and it talks about our view and of distortion when we look at immigrants and the cycles of immigration that happens. So no matter where you look at this piece, from whichever distance, it have a different look to the face. And each immigrant also held an item that resembled the fact that when immigrants usually move to a new world, that they usually bring their own skills with them and their own labor. Okay. Unfortunately, I couldn't see all the animation I did, so please go to my website, and I have a video page that have all these videos on there if you're interested. And once again, if you want to reach out to me afterwards, please do so.